Most people assume shortages announce themselves with panic, empty shelves, official warnings, emergency headlines. But real shortages do not begin that way. They begin quietly, inside spreadsheets no one reads, inside inventories labeled as adequate, inside supply chains that still appear functional on the surface. By the time the public notices, the shortage is already mature. That is exactly how the silver supply crisis is unfolding. Not as a sudden collapse, not as a dramatic failure, but as a slow cumulative drawdown that the system can no longer reverse without repricing the metal itself. The most dangerous assumption in commodities is that higher prices always bring more supply, that markets are self-correcting, that if silver becomes scarce, miners will simply dig more of it out of the ground. That assumption works for some materials. It does not work for silver. For 5 consecutive years, the global silver market has consumed more metal than it produced, not once, not briefly, but year after year, through different economic conditions, different price levels, and different narratives. This is not a weather event. It is not a temporary disruption. It is structural. Each year of deficit is covered the same way, by inventories, and that is where the illusion begins. Inventories create the appearance of abundance. They smooth volatility. They allow demand to exceed supply without immediate consequences. But inventories are not supply. They are deferred reality. Once they are drawn down, they do not regenerate on their own. The silver held in London vaults, tracked by the London Bullion Market Association, and the metal registered within the COMEX system, have acted as buffers for years, quietly absorbing the imbalance, allowing markets to function as if nothing fundamental had changed. But those buffers are thinning. A declining inventory does not mean the world has run out of silver. It means the margin for error is disappearing. It means there is less metal available to absorb shocks, less flexibility, less tolerance for disruption, and when tolerance disappears, markets become brittle. What makes silver's situation uniquely dangerous is where the metal goes once it leaves those inventories. Silver is not consumed like oil, but it is not preserved like gold either. It occupies an uncomfortable middle ground. Once fabricated into electronics, solar panels, industrial components, or military systems, it becomes effectively unavailable, not destroyed, but dispersed. Recovering it is technically possible, but economically impractical at scale, which means that a growing portion of global silver supply is functionally removed from circulation every year. This is the silent drain. It does not show up as a crisis. It shows up as a tightening. At the same time, production remains stubbornly inflexible. Roughly 70% of newly mined silver is produced as a byproduct. It comes from copper mines, zinc operations, lead projects. Silver is not the reason these mines exist. It is a secondary output, dependent on decisions made for entirely different markets. This is a critical constraint. If silver demand rises, but copper demand falls, silver supply can decline even as prices rise. No amount of enthusiasm changes that. No price signal overrides it quickly. Primary silver mines do exist, but they represent a minority of supply, and even they face the same obstacles as all modern mining: declining ore grades, rising costs, environmental regulation, community resistance, political instability. In Latin America, where a significant portion of global silver originates, these risks are not theoretical. Mexico and Peru sit at the center of the supply chain, and both have experienced labor disruptions, regulatory uncertainty, and social tension around mining activity. These are not problems that resolve with higher prices. They resolve slowly, if at all. This is why the idea that silver supply can rapidly respond to demand is a myth, a comforting one, but a myth nonetheless. Unlike currency, silver cannot be printed. It cannot be conjured through policy. It cannot be expanded by decree. It must be found, extracted, processed, transported, and each of those steps faces limits. When demand exceeds supply in a system like this, the adjustment does not come from production. It comes from price. Price is not the problem, it is the solution. Higher prices ration demand. They force efficiency. They slow discretionary use. They signal scarcity. They are the only mechanism left when physical constraints dominate. This is why silver prices have to rise in a prolonged deficit. Not because markets are emotional, but because they are functional. Shortages do not announce themselves. They reveal themselves through behavior, through longer delivery times, through rising premiums, through inventories that no longer rebuild between cycles. By the time headlines declare a crisis, the system has already adapted at a higher price. The silver supply crisis is not about mining. It is not about speculation. It is about the collision between a metal that cannot be created and an economy that increasingly depends on it. And when that collision occurs, there is no neutral outcome, only adjustment. What makes this situation especially deceptive is how calm it appears on the surface. Markets are still trading. Contracts are still clearing. There is no official declaration of shortage, no emergency coordination, no visible failure. But systems do not break at the moment they fail. They break at the moment they lose redundancy. For years, silver's redundancy came from above-ground stockpiles. Metal accumulated during periods of surplus, sitting quietly in vaults, available to bridge gaps when production fell short. That cushion allowed the market to behave as if balance still existed. Now that cushion is thinner. When inventories decline during a downturn, they can rebuild during recovery. When they decline during expansion, they can be explained away. But when they decline across multiple cycles, under different conditions, it signals something else entirely. It signals that demand is no longer cyclical. It is structural. And structural demand does not politely retreat. This is where the comparison to money becomes unavoidable. When governments run deficits, they cover them by issuing currency. When currency loses purchasing power, they issue more. The system remains liquid, even as value erodes. Silver does not have that escape valve. There is no central authority that can issue more silver to smooth imbalances. No policy lever that creates ounces when they are needed. No emergency meeting that expands supply overnight. The market must clear the old-fashioned way, through scarcity, and scarcity expresses itself through price. This is why rising silver prices are not a speculative outcome. They are an accounting outcome. They reflect the reconciliation of physical reality with economic demand. As prices rise, some uses will be forced to adapt. Margins will compress. Efficiency will improve. Substitutions will be attempted. But these adjustments take time, and they do not eliminate the need for silver itself. They merely slow the drawdown. In the meantime, industries that cannot substitute will secure supply aggressively. Not because they want to speculate, but because they cannot afford interruption. Stockpiling becomes rational. Long-term contracts become strategic. Competition for physical metal intensifies. This is how shortages become self-reinforcing. Not through panic, but through prudence. Every ounce secured by one actor is an ounce unavailable to another. Every delay in supply expansion compounds the pressure. Every year of deficit tightens the system further. Eventually, price reaches a level where balance is restored, not because supply surged, but because demand was forced to adjust. That level is always higher than expected. This is the uncomfortable truth about material constraints in a modern economy. They do not announce themselves as crises. They emerge as transitions. Silver is not running out, but it is running into limits. Limits of extraction, limits of accessibility, limits of flexibility, and when an essential material meets those limits, the outcome is never neutral. The silver supply crisis is not a future scenario. It is a process already underway, quietly reshaping the market, gradually rewriting assumptions, forcing repricing not through fear, but through necessity. By the time the shortage feels obvious, the adjustment will already have occurred, not because the system failed, but because it finally told the truth. There is one final misconception worth confronting. Many people believe that if a shortage becomes serious enough, someone in authority will step in, that governments will intervene, that markets will be stabilized, that substitutes will be mandated, that solutions will be organized from the top down. That belief comes from confusing financial crises with physical ones. Financial shortages can be patched, liquidity can be injected, confidence can be managed, numbers can be adjusted. Physical shortages do not respond to reassurance. When a material becomes scarce, no speech creates more of it. No regulation shortens geology. No emergency policy accelerates a mine that takes a decade to build. The timeline is not political, it is physical. This is why silver's supply crisis matters beyond price charts. It exposes the limits of control in a system accustomed to flexibility. It reminds markets that not everything can be smoothed, delayed, or deferred. At some point, the system must reconcile with what exists, not with what is assumed. Silver is forcing that reconciliation. The price is not sending a message about speculation, it is sending a message about availability, about competition for a resource that the modern economy quietly depends on but never planned to secure. And when planning collides with reality, the adjustment is rarely graceful. This is not a temporary imbalance waiting to be corrected. It is a structural tension working its way through the system, 1 ounce at a time, one inventory report at a time, one repricing at a time. Silver cannot be printed, it cannot be negotiated with, it cannot be replaced at scale, it can only be paid for. And that is why, in the end, price is not the story, constraint is.